Now, the New Testament books were written by multiple authors. They were written to multiple audiences from multiple locations. They were copied widely and passed amongst the most primitive communities. This is extremely important. This multifocality of the text means that the text could never be controlled by any one person or group. There was never such a thing as a Christian Uthman who created a final version and hence could impact the meaning of that final version. The New Testament did not circulate in its most primitive forms as a body of text, one body of text. It circulated as individual letters, epistles, and books. And hence the idea of controlling them, editing them, inserting doctrines, taking doctrines out, simply is historically untenable. And any accusations of that kind of changing will have to be examined in the light of history itself. There is no reason to see any of the New Testament books as having been written after the first century. All liberal arguments about later dates for some New Testament books are based upon theoretical reconstructions of early church contexts. For example, those people who would say the pastoral epistles are non-Pauline and come from the beginning of the second century do so on the basis of personal theories that they have created regarding the form of the early church that would indicate that those pastoral epistles reflect a later form of the early church. But how do they know what the early church looked like? It's all theoretical. Rather than going to the historical evidence themselves, they create theories and then alter the historical evidence to fit their theories. It is something that we have to deal with all the time. Now, the period from AD 60 to AD 313 was one of persecution of the Christian faith by the Roman Empire. Possessing and reproducing the Christian scriptures became a crime. Christianity was a religio illicita, an illegal religion. Rome destroyed thousands of texts of the Old and New Testaments that were in possession of the Christian people. But Rome could not get to all of them. Here, for example, on the screen, you see P52. P52 from around AD 100 to 150. It comes from John chapter 18. Now, if you had gone to seminary in the late 1800s in Tübingen, Germany, you would have been told that scholarship had concluded that the Gospel of John could not have been written prior to 175 AD. I think God has a sense of humor in that He preserved this little credit card-sized piece of manuscript, which comes from 50 years before that, to demonstrate that often scholars get it all wrong. This indeed is from John chapter 18, the interview between Jesus and Pilate, where Pilate asks that great question, what is truth? Here we have one of the earliest fragments, and it's from the Gospel of John, the very Gospel that gives us the clearest, most consistent, from beginning to end, testimony that Jesus Christ is the divine Son of God of any of the Gospels in our possession, and it is the most clearly testified Gospel that we have. Here is another Gospel text, P66, which likewise contains the Gospel of John. This comes from around AD 150 to 200. We have at least 12 manuscripts coming from the 2nd century. As Bart Ehrman said in my debate with him a couple of years ago, the New Testament is the earliest attested book of antiquity. There is absolutely no question about that. The Quran is not a work of antiquity, it's medieval in its origination. That's why it would not be included in that discussion. Here is manuscript P101 from the 3rd century containing the Trinitarian passage of Jesus' baptism and his identification as the Son of God. I note this in particular due to the prevalence of the mythological belief that Jesus was the divine Son of God and that the doctrine of the Trinity was made up by Constantine at the Council of Nicaea in AD 325. Such ideas are popular in fictional works like the Da Vinci Code, but they find absolutely no place in serious historical study. No one who has ever studied the Council of Nicaea and the material that was written prior to the Council of Nicaea would ever come up with such a conclusion. Here is a graphic showing those 12 manuscripts from the 2nd century that give us portions of the entirety of the New Testament. We can examine these, and they clearly demonstrate that our faith is built upon texts that are very primitive in their origination. Here is another primitive text. This is Codex Sinaiticus. Codex Sinaiticus was written between 325 and 350 AD. That's the 4th century, not the 12th century. Codex Sinaiticus is in Greek and contains both the Old and New Testaments and is a tremendous treasure. And the reason I mention it is right here is a scan directly off of all of Codex Sinaiticus is now available online. Matthew chapter 17, verses 22 through 23. The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and he will be raised on the 3rd day. There, that is, from the beginning of the 4th century, from Codex Sinaiticus, the crucifixion and the deity of Christ in the most primitive documents. Now, the New Testament has the earliest and widest attestation of any ancient document. Its immediate and widespread distribution absolutely precludes any kind of editing and any purposeful, controlled corruption. Insertion of doctrines, excision of teachings requires centralized control when speaking of a body of text like the New Testament, but this is exactly what could never have happened with the New Testament. Now, if Sheikh Awal wishes to allege textual corruption this evening, we have with us the best textual critical data. For example, on the screen you can see the Nesialan 27th edition in electronic form. You have the Greek text on the one side, you have the textual variations, the manuscripts, what they read, and everything else is provided to you right there on the right-hand side as well. We likewise have the CNTTS software available this evening, as well as full transcriptions of Codex Sinaiticus, Codex Vaticanus, and all of the papyri sitting on my computer. Any questions of corruption, we can simply look up the data themselves. We live in a wonderful day when it comes to that. Let me give you an example, even though my time is fleeting. This is Romans chapter 5, verse 1 in Codex Sinaiticus. There is a textual variant here. Let me blow it up for you so you can see what it is. Right there we have the term ekomen. Ekomen is the subjunctive form of ekamen, which is the actual normal reading. In fact, let me show you what that looks like in a Greek text. There's what it looks like in the Greek text. You can see over on the left-hand side, ekamen is the reading of that text. But down below, it lists ekomen, and it gives you the manuscripts that have that reading. You see, Christians are wide open about our texts. We publish this kind of information, and we don't hide it from anybody. We provide this kind of information, and we discuss all this information in all of our critical commentaries and in the proper exegesis of the text of the Scriptures. However, where is the critical edition of the Quran? You see, we must remember that any handwritten document that has been passed down through time has experienced textual corruption. For example, if we look at Surah 2, 222, and we compare the Fogg's palimpsest manuscript with the modern Uthmanic Quran. In the top line you have Fogg's palimpsest manuscript. Below you have the reading that we found in any of the Arabic Qurans that any of our Muslim friends here this evening would be carrying. And if you can read the Arabic language, you will see that there are changes of words, changes of word order, changes of grammatical termination and form, changes in the editing of the text. Very clearly, what we have here historically is an effort upon a later redactor to remove from the text of the Quran the influences of a certain man by the name of Ibn Masud. Ibn Masud's readings were different in places than those of the Uthmanic recension. And for quite some time we have evidence of the continuing presence of Ibn Masud's readings in the historical text of the Quran. And so we need to keep this in mind. All of us, anyone who has ancient texts, has to examine those texts in the light of history. Which is better, to have one edited text where you've removed all of this, or to have one text with thousands of copies of it so you can reconstruct the original and you don't have to rely upon an editor and hope that he got it all right? That is one of the questions that we have when we discuss this issue. Now, very quickly, historical issues. Often allegations are made relating to secular history. In each of these instances, we simply ask that the Bible's testimony be treated fairly and not presumed guilty until proven innocent, just as Muslims ask for any such questions relating to the Quran. In regards to theological issues, theological accusations of corruption require one to allow the Bible to define its own teaching and theology. Demanding the Bible teach in accordance with external criterion is irrational. Muslims often import Quranic standards into their reading of the Bible, not realizing that logically the Bible, even by the Quran's own testimony, was sent down prior to the Quran. Islamic theology is definitely stuck with an anachronism as seen in Surah